Rome's battlefield dominance didn't begin with better weapons, it began with better organization. The manipular formation was one of the earliest tactical systems that made the Roman army different from every force around them. Instead of fighting as one solid mass, soldiers were divided into 3 separate lines. At the front stood the hastati, young aggressive fighters sent to absorb the first shock of battle. Behind them were the principes, experienced soldiers ready to push forward when the fight intensified. At the very back, the triarii, hardened veterans, last line of defense, but the real genius wasn't just the 3 lines. It was how they were arranged. Roman units stood in a checkerboard pattern known as the quincunx formation. This created gaps between units, gaps that allowed movement, enforcement, and controlled retreat. The front line started collapsing. Soldiers could fall back through the gaps while fresh troops moved forward. Formation could bend without breaking. This made the Roman army completely different from the rigid Greek phalanx. It relied on a single unbreakable wall of spears. If that wall shattered, the entire army fell apart. Rome didn't rely on a wall. Rome relied on layers. The manipular system was developed during the Samnite Wars. Romans realized they needed flexibility to fight in rough terrain, and once perfected, gave them a massive tactical advantage. Enemies believed they were fighting one line, but in reality, they were facing 3 waves of disciplined soldiers. And when the triarii finally stepped forward, it meant the battle had reached its most critical moment. In this formation, Rome learned its greatest lesson. An army that can adapt cannot be easily defeated. Before Roman soldiers ever touched their swords, they broke the enemy first. The pilum was not just a javelin, it was a tactical weapon designed to destroy formations before close combat even began. Every Roman legionary carried 1 or 2 pila. As the army advanced, they would stop just short of engagement range, and then, on command, hundreds of heavy javelins would be thrown at once. This wasn't random, it was calculated chaos. Pilum had a soft iron shank behind its tip. When it struck a shield, metal bent on impact. This made it impossible to pull out and impossible to throw back. Enemy shields became heavy, twisted, and useless. Soldiers were forced to drop their protection right before Roman infantry charged. At that moment, discipline turned into devastation. The enemy line, already shaken, now faced advancing legionaries with gladius swords and tight formations. The volley didn't just injure, disrupted. Formations broke, communication failed, confidence dropped, and Rome attacked at the exact moment the enemy lost control. This tactic was especially effective against tribal armies and phalanx formations, which depended heavily on shield integrity. Once shields were compromised, the entire structure of the enemy line began to collapse. The pilum gave Romans a psychological edge as well. Imagine standing in formation, and suddenly hundreds of heavy spears crashing into your shield wall, bending, sticking, dragging it down. You weren't just fighting soldiers anymore. You were fighting a system designed to weaken you before the real battle even started. Rome didn't rush into combat blindly. They prepared the battlefield first. The pilum was the tool that turned the first seconds of contact into Rome's advantage. Roman warfare was built for one purpose: to end a fight quickly and efficiently. While many ancient armies relied on long spears and wide sword swings, Roman soldiers were trained for something far more controlled: close-quarters shock combat. At the center of this doctrine was the gladius, a short sword designed not for slashing, but for stabbing. Roman legionaries fought shoulder to shoulder, shields locked, advancing step by step in disciplined formation. When they reached the enemy, they didn't swing wildly. They thrust forward, fought precise, lethal movements aimed at the torso. This method had several advantages. Stabbing required less energy than swinging. It kept soldiers protected behind their shields. In tight formations, allowed hundreds of men to fight at once without breaking order. The goal was not heroic duels. The goal was controlled destruction. Roman soldiers were drilled relentlessly to maintain formation, even in chaos. Every movement was practiced. Step, shield, thrust, recover. This turned the legion into a machine. Against tribal warriors who fought individually, Romans fought as one unit. Against phalanx armies locked in spear pushing, Romans slipped inside their reach and attacked at close range. Once the distance closed, discipline defeated aggression. The enemy line began to crack, not from one powerful strike, from hundreds of coordinated thrusts delivered in perfect rhythm. It was shock combat, fast, direct, relentless. It reflected the Roman mindset of warfare. Not about glory, not about rage, about efficiency, control, finishing the battle with calculated force. There was a moment in Roman history when the army stopped being a temporary force and became a permanent instrument of conquest. In 107 BCE, during a time of crisis, Rome needed change, and that change came through military reform. The old manipular system, flexible and effective, replaced by a new structure built around cohorts. Instead of small maniples arranged in staggered lines, the legion was reorganized into 10 larger cohorts. Each cohort was stronger, more self-contained, and easier to command. This simplified battlefield control. Commanders no longer had to manage dozens of small tactical blocks. They directed 10 powerful units that could move independently, reinforce each other, operate as a single force. But the reform went deeper than structure. For the first time, Rome opened military service to landless citizens. The army was no longer a seasonal militia of property owners. It became a professional standing army. Soldiers now served long terms, trained continuously, relied on military service for income and future land rewards. This created something Rome had never truly possessed before: full-time warriors. Equipment was standardized, training intensified, loyalty shifted from the Senate toward commanding generals. The legion transformed from a citizen defense force into a disciplined engine of expansion. And with this transformation, Rome's military campaigns became longer, farther, and more ambitious. The cohort system gave the army durability. Professionalization gave it endurance. Together, they turned Rome from a powerful republic into an unstoppable expansionist superpower. From this point forward, Rome did not simply fight wars, it mastered them. On ancient battlefields, arrows were often deadlier than swords. Before armies even clashed, volleys of missiles could break formations, destroy morale, and stop an advance entirely. But Rome found a way to move forward, even under a storm of arrows. The answer was the testudo, tortoise formation. Roman soldiers locked their shields together in perfect coordination. Front ranks covered the front, side ranks protected the flanks, and soldiers in the center raised shields overhead, forming a solid protective shell. From a distance, it looked like a moving wall of iron and wood. Arrows struck and slid off. Stones crashed and bounced away. Formation held. This tactic was especially powerful during sieges. As Roman troops advanced toward enemy walls, defenders rained down arrows, boiling oil, and heavy projectiles. Most armies would be forced to retreat, but the testudo allowed Roman soldiers to keep moving, step by step, protected from above and all sides. It demanded extreme discipline. One soldier breaking formation could expose dozens of others. Every man had to trust the one beside him. Every shield had to remain locked in place. It was not a tactic built on speed or aggression. It was built on patience, coordination, and control. The testudo turned Roman infantry into a living fortress, slow, steady, nearly impossible to stop from a distance. And it revealed something essential about Roman warfare. Rome didn't always win by charging forward. Sometimes, Rome won by advancing carefully, refusing to break, and turning defense into unstoppable progress. Most ancient battles were decided by exhaustion. Armies charged, collided, fought fiercely, and within a short time were too tired to lift their weapons properly. Once fatigue set in, formations collapsed. Rome understood something critical. Victory doesn't always go to the strongest army. It goes to the one that lasts longer. Roman commanders rarely committed all their forces at once. Instead, they deployed their troops in depth. Multiple lines with fresh reserves held behind the front. The first line engaged the enemy and absorbed the initial shock. If they began to tire or lose momentum, they didn't break. They rotated. Through controlled movement, exhausted soldiers would fall back while fresh troops stepped forward to continue the fight. For the enemy, it felt like facing an endless wave. Just when they believed the Romans were weakening, a new, fully energized line appeared. This system created constant pressure. The enemy, by contrast, often committed everything at the beginning. Once their front ranks grew tired, there was no relief. Fatigue turned into panic. Panic turned into disorder. Roman discipline made rotation possible even in chaos. Soldiers trusted commands. Units moved with structure, not desperation. The result was psychological as well as physical dominance. Opponents began to feel that the Roman army simply could not be worn down. Battle after battle, Rome proved that controlled endurance was more powerful than reckless aggression, because in the end, the army that can fight for one more hour is the army that wins. Rome didn't just fight enemies, it trapped them. One of the most devastating tactics used by Roman commanders was the pincer movement, an attack designed not just to defeat the enemy, but to surround and destroy them completely. Strategy began with a direct engagement. Roman infantry would hold the enemy in place from the front, locking them into combat and preventing retreat. While the enemy focused on the main line, additional Roman units moved along the flanks, slowly, quietly, deliberately. Then the trap closed. Flanking forces struck from the sides, while cavalry moved to cut off escape routes behind the enemy. What started as a normal battle suddenly turned into an encirclement. The enemy found themselves surrounded. No retreat, no reinforcement, no clear direction to escape. Panic spread quickly in these moments. Formations broke. Communication failed. Soldiers began fighting individually instead of as a unit. And once cohesion was lost, the battle was already decided. The pincer movement wasn't about speed alone. It required timing, coordination, and discipline across multiple units. Executed too early, the enemy could escape. Too late, opportunity was gone. But when done correctly, it was devastating. Entire armies could be trapped and destroyed, not because they were weaker, but because they were outmaneuvered. This tactic showed Rome's true battlefield philosophy. Victory was not just about strength, it was about control, positioning, forcing the enemy into a fight they could not win. Because once Rome closed the circle, there was nowhere left to run. Most ancient armies marched, fought, and then rested wherever they could. Rome did something different. Wherever a Roman legion stopped, even for a single night, they built a fortress. This was the castra system. At the end of a long march, tired soldiers didn't collapse onto the ground. Instead, they immediately began construction. Trenches were dug. Earth was piled into ramparts. Wooden stakes were placed along the perimeter. Gates were positioned with precision. Within hours, an open field became a fortified military camp. Every camp followed a standardized layout. Streets arranged in a grid, designated command centers, supply areas, and defensive towers. It didn't matter if the legion was in Spain, Gaul, or the Near East. Structure remained the same. This consistency created order. Even in foreign territory, Roman soldiers slept inside a defensive system they knew perfectly. But the castra system wasn't just about protection, it was about control. A fortified camp prevented surprise night attacks. It secured supplies. It gave commanders a stable base to plan the next day's movement. While enemy tribes relied on mobility and sudden raids, Roman legions operated from structured strongholds, and this engineering discipline extended beyond camps. Romans built roads to move troops faster. They constructed bridges to cross rivers in days. During sieges, they surrounded entire cities with walls, sometimes building miles of fortifications to trap defenders inside. War, for Rome, was not chaos. It was construction under pressure.